Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Welcome into another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Ralph, joined as always my co-hosts Connor Hope and Riley Davis, previewing the Sweet 16. That first weekend of the NCAA Tournament, guys, was kind of insane. I don't know how else to put it. Like, Fairleigh Dickinson, Princeton, like it got to a point on Friday night where Fairleigh Dickinson was winning. There's all the chaos going down, and you like kind of forgot that, Princeton beat Arizona the night before, and it kind of set the tone for the rest of the weekend. We're going to go through and preview all these Sweet 16 games, give you our revised Final Four picks. But Riley, before we start, let's talk about the weekend that was. What was the major thing or a couple things that stood out to you from opening weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head by even saying, like, what the Princeton win over Arizona was on Thursday, and by Friday night, no one was talking about it because Fairleigh Dickinson and Purdue. But even that Saturday game where Arkansas overcame a 12-point deficit to beat Kansas, like, I'm not going to say I forgot about Purdue Fairleigh Dickinson because, I think with it being the second time a 16 beat a 1, it's like, it's still really incredible, especially just considering that they're a sub 300 KenPom team, or were at least, and didn't even win their conference tournament. Like, I'm not trying to take away from their shine at all, but I think when Virginia was the first, that felt mind blowing for like a good couple of weeks, where this tournament was so insane that by Saturday I was like, oh shoot, this Kansas team, who looked very much the part of a threat to repeat a week and a half ago, is just done in a game that they should have won against it. Like, I think Eric Musselman is a fantastic coach, and I think he's proving that his style and his ability to attack mismatches is really hard to draw against in the tournament. But I don't think, like, this Arkansas team is flawed. The pieces are talented, but they don't fit necessarily the best. And the fact that Kansas still couldn't get over the hump even without Bill Self was just really shocking for me. I kind of couldn't believe Kansas dropped that game, especially being ahead by so much in the second half.
Yeah, I can.
Hey,
I think if Kansas wins that game, they win the West, in my opinion, right? Because for as good as UCLA's defense is, for as good as UConn and Gonzaga have been playing, Arkansas was the one team in that region that their entire identity is making sure there's no flow to a game, right? That's just the way Arkansas plays. And when you have a point guard like DeJuan Harris, and you have players like Grady Dick and Jalen Wilson, who are your top scorers, you need some flow to that offense in order to get going. And what Arkansas did at the end of that game, based on what I was in Sacramento at Golden One, watching the Princeton Missouri game, and I think it ended during that game. It might have been during the UCLA game. What I was watching on the screen when they were doing the live look-ins was just a Kansas team that had no flow to that offense in that second half. And that's entirely on Arkansas. And so if you were looking for a team to beat Kansas, the only one that I think made sense in the moment was Arkansas, because the other three are going to keep offense. UCLA would stop the offensive flow a little bit, but they don't play at the same type of defense that Arkansas team always plays. And so Kansas, really good team. They're like Gonzaga. They're like some of these other Arizona. You need a flow to that offense for it to succeed. And in that second half, there just was none. And I think that just put a stamp on a really good weekend that set up a really good second weekend, because you only had 5 double-digit seeds win in the first round. And that's counting Penn State as the 10 seed. But it felt like there were so many upsets. There were 5. And it felt like there were a ton. And then in the second round, you had the Arkansas win. You had Princeton run the floor on Missouri. And you had FAU win their game. Wasn't an upset. Obviously, they were playing a 16 seed. But the fact that FAU is now in the Sweet 16, again, you feel like there were a bunch of upsets. But really, the only game that doesn't look like it will be close on paper is that Princeton-Creighton game, because every other game are really high caliber teams. And so you set up a really good second weekend, and you still felt like there was some sort of major upset trend in this tournament, despite the fact that there really wasn't one outside of Furman and Furman, Princeton, and Fairleigh Dickinson.
I think we got a lot of really good games too from like talk about Florida Atlantic. That Memphis Florida Atlantic game was some of the most absurd basketball, both good and bad, down the stretch that we could see. That was incredibly entertaining. Princeton, Arizona, not just the fact that Princeton won, but that game and that comeback they had certainly fits the bill. You go down the line, like there were games where it was like, oh, is Northern Kentucky like gonna beat Houston? And no, they fell apart down the stretch, but there was 30 minutes of that game where you're like, well, maybe. And it felt like every game had at least that, where I was like, oh, maybe this could happen. There were a lot that came down to the last few minutes. We also got reminded that guard play really matters. You know, someone might want to tell Matt Painter that you need guys who can handle press. Riley, you mentioned it not feeling like as monumental as the UMBC win, and obviously nothing's going to when it's not the first time. I thought it was more, and I'm sorry, Purdue fans, but it was more kind of hilarious because Fairleigh Dickinson played well and showed themselves well all tournament. But when you go on and on about how, like, you know, Purdue can't handle pressure, they can't handle pressure. It's very obvious they can't handle pressure, but they can't handle Fairleigh Dickinson's pressure. Like that's the level that this is at. But you go up and down the list. You know, Florida Atlantic has some really good guards led by Janelle Davis. Marquise Newell won Kansas State the game against Kentucky. Miami's backcourt won them the game against Indiana. Xavier, Texas, same kind of deal. You could argue Arkansas's backcourt won that game against Kansas on both ends of the court, and Kansas didn't have an answer because they didn't have that individual shot creator that we talk so much about. So the year of the big, we talked about it. We previewed it in the Almanac before the season started. We talked about the big guys all season long, but when push comes to shove, you need guards. You need quality guards who know how to handle a moment and know how to make plays. And the teams that do, except for Memphis, the teams that do are in the Sweet 16.
I was just going to mention with Purdue and Fairleigh Dickinson and their guards. Part of it too, I was just going to add why I don't think it felt as monumental to me was because I was in Greensboro that Friday for there's 4 games in that little region, and I was there from like 10 a.m. till after midnight, and it felt like a time warp, like just being in a Coliseum and not seeing the sunlight for 14 hours. And I think just kind of by the end of it, as they were doing the live cut-ins to the Purdue Fairleigh Dickinson game, my mind was just like, oh, anything goes right now. This is all normal because I have not seen the sun and like, again, 12 hours at that point probably. So ton of fun. Would highly recommend anybody who's able to do that to just go spend a day watching in-person tournament games, but a little bit of a weird experience as well too.
Oh, I'm sure. You spend that much time in the Coliseum. Well, let's get started. We talked about that Arkansas win over Kansas. So we'll start in the West region out in Vegas because to me, this is the most fun of the regions and what's left. You have Arkansas, the 8 seed facing UConn, Gonzaga, the 3 seed facing UCLA, the 2. We can start with that Arkansas UConn game. And Connor, I'll start with you because you talked about Arkansas. To me, this is a ton of fun. Just the fact you're going to have Eric Musselman and Dan Hurley on the sidelines, but 2 teams that pride themselves on the defensive end, athletic, kind of gritty. It's going to be a bit of a street fight.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. And it's, I wish we had seen a fully healthy St. Mary's in that second half against UConn, because I felt like that was turning into a really good game, but without their best shooter, and their starting wing and Alex Dukas, the depth is hurt. Sonogo just had the advantage over everything St. Mary's could put in that front court. And that's not a bad front court. Sonogo's just dominant. And so I think what it really comes down to it is whose guards will step up, because you've got 2 freshmen and plus Devo Davis at Arkansas. You've got Nick Smith and Anthony Black are going to handle the ball a lot. You've got Newton and Hawkins for UConn, who are not traditional, like they're big guards. And if you follow Ant Wright on Twitter, big guards don't win in March, right? Every national champion has started a guard under 6'3", going back I don't know how long, and UConn just doesn't. That's not going to impact how I look at this game. But I just feel like St. Mary's did a lot of things defensively against UConn that worked in that first half. And Arkansas's defense is going to do a lot of things that work against UConn. And I feel like they'll do a better job keeping Sanogo out of the paint than St. Mary's did. Because St. Mary's is really good. They just couldn't keep Sanogo out of the paint. But I think the bodies that Arkansas has in the front court it's so deep with just fouls, right? It's so deep with fouls that St. Mary's plays 2 bigs and Arkansas can play 3 or 4. So I feel like Sanogo is going to have a little bit more of a physical go of it against this Arkansas team. So it comes back down to the backcourt. I'm sticking with my Arkansas Elite 8 pick, but the way UConn played in that second half has me second guessing it just a little bit.
Riley, how do you see it playing out?
I'm all in on the Huskies. I hear Connor's points. I think Arkansas's length could cause UConn some issues. I think Jordan Walsh and Anthony Black are just 2 dudes who not only have that, the NBA pedigree, or the NBA potential, and they have that length, but they also just play so hard. Like Musselman has really got these dudes to buy in, and it's evident in kind of how they've been able to rally after some inconsistent play throughout the season. They lost 4 of their last 5 heading into the tournament, and yet still here he is in the Sweet 16. It's pretty big testament to his coaching. But I think part of it with UConn, just the way they can get out and run, the way they can score in transition, paired with their 3-point shooting, I think is really tough for a lot of teams to overcome, unless you kind of got a guy who can go off like that as well. And who knows, maybe we see Nick Smith finally put it all together. But I mean, Arkansas made 3 3-pointers against Kansas. If you look at UConn's last few games, they made 10 threes against St. Mary's, 11 threes against Iona, just 7 against Marquette, but hit 13 against Providence the game before that, 8 against Villanova, 10 against DePaul, 9 against St. John's, 10 against Providence. Like going back in their little streak they're on, where they've won 8 of their last 9 games. I mean, they're shooting the ball at an extremely high level, and you saw it play out in the St. Mary's game, where it's like, okay, St. Mary's kind of contained them for the first 20 minutes. They had them, they were controlling the tempo a little bit, grinding the game out, pounding the air, taking the air out of the ball, and controlling the glass. But then in the second half, UConn was able to break free and went on that little 11-0 run, where you have Jordan Hawkins and Alex Caravan just draining step-in threes, like off the fast break. That's really hard to stop, and I just don't think Arkansas has the offense to keep up.
That to me is
even in a tournament setting where it can slow down. I
trust UConn's floor and like the baseline of how they'll play more than Arkansas's. Like Arkansas got 21 second half points from Devo Davis in that game to come back and beat Kansas, which they needed. And they have multiple guys who can go do that. That's why everybody was so high in Arkansas in the preseason. But I don't think they beat UConn unless they get another one of those like really special individual performances from somebody. I'm not going to say it can't happen, because it certainly can. And this game is going to be played in Arkansas's style, where it's more in the half court, more physical. But they're going to need somebody to play at their best. And Arkansas has not had that consistently. It's why they were the 8th seed, right? I'm not gonna like sit here and bet against Eric Musselman in March, because that's been not the smart decision the last 3 to 4 years in the NCAA tournament. But I think trust UConn more, and just knowing what I'm going to get from them. And if Jordan Hawkins has a game that we've seen him have numerous times this season, then I don't necessarily think it matters what Arkansas does. This other game, Connor, Gonzaga, UCLA, might be the most fun of the first of the Sweet 16. I'll let you take it as a former Gonzaga podcast. Felt like we need to make sure we touched on this early. But what are you seeing from this matchup?
Man, I really hope UCLA is fully healthy. But I mean, if they are, they're just tough, right? And this is fully healthy without Jalen Clark. I feel like there's going to be situations. We might see a situation where we just get Kenneth Nwuba and Mac Etienne for 12 minutes in the first half. Like, that's entirely plausible, where Adem Bona can't keep up with Timmy's footwork, fouls him twice in the first 8 to 10 minutes, and then it's a whole different ball game, right? Or they go small because they kind of can against Gonzaga, put Jaquez at the 5. But to me, it comes down to, can Gonzaga contain Tiger Campbell? Not 40 minutes. Can they contain Tiger Campbell for 15 minutes out of the 40 minutes in the same way that they contained Mike Miles in the second half of that TCU game? And if they can do that, if they can trap Tiger Campbell coming off screens, if they can prevent him from getting the passes off to Jaime Jaquez in the mid-range or David Singleton from 3, they have a really good chance. The issue is that Gonzaga has not been a consistently good defensive team against point guards. Tiger Campbell has the best court vision of any point guard in the country, full stop. And you've got Jaime Jaquez, who, if he's not the best player on the West Coast, he's 1B to Drew Timme, right? So to me, they have to get the bigs in foul trouble. And Anton Watson has to defend Jaime Jaquez to the same degree that he defended Oscar Tshiebwe in that game against Kentucky earlier this season. Because if you can shut down one of those 3, if you can shut down Campbell, Singleton from 3, or Jaquez, I feel like you have a much better opportunity. If you're just letting Amari Bailey try and beat you, like, that's what Gonzaga needs to do. They just need to force it into Bailey's hands for the entirety of that game. Let him go at Julian Strother or Rajir Bolton all night. He's going to get his buckets, but you're keeping the ball out of your most dangerous offensive weapon's hands. And I feel like that's something that Gonzaga is going to try to do. And it might blow up in their face. Amari Bailey might have his best 3-point shooting performance he's had all season. But I feel like if you can force them to just hit Amari Bailey on back cuts the entire time,
I'll jump in here real quick, Riley, because that was what I wanted to touch on with UCLA is Amari Bailey. Like, to me, he swings this game one way or the other. I give UCLA the slight edge, but I'm certainly not going to write Gonzaga off, particularly with what they showed against CCU. Amari Bailey in the Pac-12 tournament, in the first round of the NCAA tournament, has scored 26 points, 9 points, blowout win over Oregon, 19, 17, and 14. He has been a consistent offensive producer for them at a level he was not at in the regular season. He was not asked to be in the regular season because he was playing behind Jalen Clark. He has stepped into that. To me, if he's going to be that 5-star freshman, like, and he's going to have a moment where it's like, oh yeah, Amari Bailey, that's why he was a 5-star. This might be the game because it's him against Julian Strother, and Strother is certainly a fine player, but throughout the season, the players like Amari Bailey, the super athletic, longer, skilled perimeter guys are who Gonzaga has struggled with. Yeah, you need to take Tiger Campbell out. You got to take Jaime Jaquez out, mitigate that. You got to handle David Singleton from 3. Everything you just said, Connor. But the X factor here is Amari Bailey can go for 25, can go for 30. He has that potential. He has that skill set, and he's perfectly apt to exploit what has been a weakness for Gonzaga this season. Whether he can or not, to me, dictates this game. Because if he starts doing that, then you have to take some pressure off Tiger Campbell. You have to take some pressure off Jaime Jaquez and start giving Bailey attention. To me, that's what swings this. Is if Bailey has one of those games that he's talented enough to and has shown he can thrive in a more high profile role. But he's going to be on the biggest stage he's put on in his career, and they're going to need him to deliver.
And I think on the other end of it, the one thing Gonzaga has that UCLA doesn't is the player that necessitates a double team every time he touches the ball, especially against the bigs of UCLA. Who do you help off of? You probably help off of Anton Watson, right? But you're not putting Jaime Jaquez on Anton Watson. You're putting David Singleton on Anton Watson. David Singleton's not a great defensive player. Fantastic shooter, not a great defensive player. So you want Jaime Jaquez to help off, which means you either have to put your best defensive player remaining on Gonzaga's least. I mean, Anton Watson's he is a threat, but he's not a threat from deep, and he's just a rim runner at this point. So do you want Jaquez to be on Watson, or do you want Jaquez to be on Julian Strother, shut down their biggest weapon, their most explosive weapon? But you can't help off Strother. Like, that's what Gonzaga has to do, is they have to attack with Timmy. Timmy has to touch the ball in the post every single time down the floor. He showed it against TCU. He can pass out of the post. He can pass really well out of the post. Gonzaga just needs to open up those shooters, and they need to hit. You can't have Roger Bolton airmailing a three from the corner wide open in the same way that he did against TCU.
Riley, how are you looking at this game? What's the key for you?
Going into this game, or going into the tournament, I kind of thought this could be where UCLA sputtered out, where not having Jalen Clark would kind of be what ultimately undoes them. But I didn't know Amari Bailey was going to step up like this and perform how he did in the first two rounds. But I will say with Gonzaga, something that I think that I would say I'd be encouraged by if I was a Gonzaga fan, is looking even at that second round game against TCU. The score was 84-81, but Gonzaga only scored like just over a point per possession. They held TCU to right at a point per possession too, to where it was a high possession game that Gonzaga ultimately was able to win. But it wasn't like they had this otherworldly offensive performance and were still able to get a win against a tough team in TCU that prides itself on its defense, that prides itself on forcing turnovers. And to get in a situation to win a game like that, I think is pretty impressive, to where, I mean, UCLA is going to want to grind it out more. They're going to want to play a game in the 60s. And just seeing Gonzaga, looking at how they've played over the last month, where they put up 1.24 points per possession against St. Mary's, like less than a month ago. St. Mary's defense that's 6th in the country, which is just wild that they're able to do that to some of the best competition out there. But I was encouraged that, like, even when maybe the shots weren't falling as much as they had been, you still got Drew Timme, who has the best footwork in the post in the country, and he was able to scheme him touches, and he gets you a bucket. And not to mention, he hit that little off the dribble three to kind of punctuate that run that Gonzaga had about halfway through the second half. So yeah, that's I think you all kind of provided a very thorough analysis and breakdown of the game that I don't really have anything new to add to that, but that's just a little trend that I noticed that would encourage me if I was a Zags fan.
Gonzaga needs to lead at some point in this game by 7 to 10 points to win this game. I truly believe that. Like, Gonzaga needs to come out, and whether it's at the start of the first half or the start of the second half, blow the doors off the game. Because if they keep it close, if they keep it low scoring, UCLA has every opportunity and every weapon to win. If they start to run up the score, I just don't see UCLA being able to do it. But it's getting those kill shots in that I think UCLA has done a really good job of not allowing. And that's it's a different defense than TCU. It might not be as aggressive, which might be better for the Gonzaga guards, but it's still
who
very
comes out of this region? And we'll keep it quick because I know we got 3 more to get to. We'll start churning through them here, but who gets out of this region? Who makes the Final Four, Connor?
I'm going to go with Gonzaga.
Riley?
I'm going UConn over Gonzaga. I do kind of feel like the stars are aligning for Tiger Campbell and Jaime Jaquez to get back to the Final Four, because Jaime has been just a monster over the last couple months of the season. But I'm going to stick with my original pick and say UConn over Gonzaga.
I'm sticking with my original pick too, and that's UCLA over UConn. I think the Gonzaga-UCLA game is going to be like, I don't know if it's historically great, but like you look back on this tournament and you're like, that's one of the like top 3 games you remember. In a tournament where a 16 seed won, you're going to, I think, remember how good that game was. So certainly could go either way there, but I'll take UCLA, and I do think whoever wins that game, Gonzaga-UCLA, moves on to the Final Four. Let's go to the Midwest now. Chalk relatively held as much as it did in any of these brackets. I have the 1 seed Houston facing the 5 seed Miami, 2 seed Texas facing the 3 seed Xavier Riley. You were in Greensboro, saw this Xavier team. We'll start with a matchup with them in Texas. It feels like Texas is relatively heavily favored in this, but to me, Xavier showed itself pretty well in Greensboro. What did you see for the Musketeers, and how do they stack up in this matchup?
Yeah, I think Xavier, I mean, something that always has stuck out to me all year watching them is how well they move the ball. The offense really is just a gorgeous system that Sean Miller has instituted this year, where you have Colby Jones who can run the show a little bit. Of course, you have Soleil Boom, and both of those guys were pretty clutch down the stretch in that first game against Kennesaw State. That was a game where the Owls, they got into the lane at will kind of in the first half, where it was Terrell Burden kept probing that defense, getting into the paint off a pick and roll, finding open shooters, finishing at the rim, and getting a lot of those finishes around Jack Nungy. But in the second half, you had Boom really turned it on about halfway through and had to hit a couple like those just really crafty finishes and a nice little runner there. And Colby Jones really made his money on the defensive end, locking up Terrell Burden. So honestly, I didn't really know Colby Jones could defend like that. And, maybe a detractor could say it was still against an ASUN point guard, but Terrell Burden's, he's a dude. I mean, it's not like he's some scrub. Like, he's probably shorter than me, but that dude's a unit. He's built like a tank and very talented. So I'm pretty interested to see, like, who does Sean Miller assign Colby Jones to in crunch time against Texas? Does he draw the Marcus Carr assignment? Maybe he even draws Sir Jabari Rice if he's goes on a heater again. I still like the way that this Texas team has been playing a ton because they defend well. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes it does feel like these different storylines transcend basketball, where you have the team who lost their head coach and they're playing for something bigger here, playing to prove a point or something that just has me not ready to bet against them, against a team that I think is very good in Xavier, but still an inferior opponent.
Connor?
I'm torn because Jack Nungy is a pretty good interior defender. Not great, pretty good. Xavier's defense isn't because their interior defense sucks. Granted, they're 93rd in 2-point field goal percentage.
Hey,
but
like I said, Terrell Burden got around him a couple times. Nungy got the block, but Burden got the better of him some.
It's top 100. Their issue has been they are abysmal against three-pointers. Abysmal. Texas isn't a great shooting team. They can get hot, no doubt. They're not an elite 3-point shooting team, and they're going against a team that is an elite 3-point shooting team. So if this becomes a 3-point shootout, Xavier wins, and Texas needs to prevent that, which they can do. But I just feel like if you have a situation where Soleil Boom and Colby Jones, they just start going off, like, that's the game that Xavier wants. They want the game that's up and down the floor, shooting a ton of jump shots, because they win that game going away. Texas needs to slow it down. I actually think that the winning the game is dictated by what Texas does, not by what Xavier does. Because if Xavier just plays their game, they win this game. The onus is on Texas to prevent Xavier from being.
This is why I love this Texas team so much. First round against Colgate, they made 13 threes, 13 for 23. And now they weren't great from three against Penn State, but they did it. Against Gonzaga, Connor, earlier this season, was another one of those games where Texas went berserk from three. They have that personnel. They can do that. They can win grinded out style. They can win playing up tempo. They can win shooting the three. They can win inside like they did against Penn State with Dylan DeSue. they can beat you so many different ways. And I don't trust Xavier's defense, point blank. Their offense can keep things interesting. Solar Boom can keep things interesting. But like Texas has 3 of those guys back there: Marcus Carr, Tyrese Hunter, and Serge Rice coming off the bench. Like, to me, it might end up going similar to the Penn State game, where it's a little close down the stretch and the final score is close, but the result's never really in doubt. And that, to me, has been the most impressive thing about Texas in this tournament. And I feel the same way about UCLA. We can bring that up with UCLA, but probably should have earlier. Their 2 wins have been very mature wins, right? Where a lot of these teams, even the 1 seeds, there's been some semblance of panic, or they're down a lot, or they go through stretches where they're not scoring or playing well. Like UCLA, Texas hasn't had any of those. They came out and took care of business against a very good Colgate team. Every time Colgate threatened, Texas answered, and it was never really a game. Against Penn State, Penn State went on that run late, but Texas answered in a way where it was, we know how we need to attack. Well, they went out and they did that, and it worked. Xavier's defense, like I think Xavier has to play a perfect style of game to win. Anything that deviates from that is a pretty easy Texas win, in my mind. And I still think Xavier can play perfect, and they still may not win. Because if Texas goes 13-23 from 3 again, like, I'm sorry.
It's over. Good run.
I don't want to say that this is like a lock, because I don't feel that way at all. Xavier's certainly a good enough team. But to me, this is one of the few games where there's a definite favorite and a definite underdog in my mind.
Yeah, I would even say, with Texas not having the shooting to maybe expose Xavier's abysmal 3-point defense, all you need is one. You just need Marcus Carr or Serge Ibaka to catch fire. That could happen. And even with Nunji, having his moments as a rim protector, I think he likes to play in that drop coverage. And I think, Marcus Carr can get buckets in the mid range, or they can also use Dylan Dessou to pull him out from the basket a little bit. I mean, Dessou was cooking in the mid range against Penn State. So I think there's matchups there that Texas can take advantage of. And I won't use the L word either and call it a lock, but it would just really surprise me if Texas wasn't able to win this game.
Houston and Miami, the other matchup in this region in Kansas City. To me, Riley, they're not mirror images of each other, but want to play similar ways, similar styles, smaller teams. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think going into this game, I'm still going to stick with my Houston national title pick. It's close. I'll share when we get to our title picks, updated Final Fours. I'll share who's really tempted me to pick someone differently. But I think their formula just feels so safe in the tournament of controlling the glass, playing really tough physical defense. And I would say that would give them a big advantage to Miami, or over Miami, even if they don't have the greatest size. The fact that they just have a whole bunch of bigs, a whole bunch of big wings as well, who they're just going to send at the glass and control everything and get extra possessions. Until you realize that Miami is coming off a game where they got 20 offensive rebounds against Indiana and Trace Jackson Davis. And, you can make your Indiana jokes. I'm definitely not going to stop you from that. Brian, if you want to take a victory lap,
yeah,
I'll give you a moment to do that. Because it's like Indiana, yeah, they kind of played soft at the moment, but still getting 20 offensive boards when your tallest player is 6'7" Norshad Omier. Like, I don't necessarily think Houston's going to have the crazy rebounding advantage that they typically do.
Indiana got out-rebounded by
Houston
20
out on top
by a team that doesn't play anybody taller than 6'7". Just putting that out
tank, though. You at least you can give them that. Omir's a big old boy.
He's good.
But I just hope we get and I hope in this game we get a little battle of the guards where I would love to, Sasser's healthy enough where he and Isaiah Wong get some big shots where we're going to get, at least one of them's going to hit multiple logo threes. I'm calling it now.
Any chance of an upset, Connor?
Maybe both.
No, and I honestly don't know if this game's going to be close. I think
Classic hating on the ACC.
Miami has yet to play a tough team.
What? They played Indiana.
I'm just going to throw it out there.
What?
They have yet to play a tough team in this tournament.
Drake is tough.
And-
Don't slander the Bulldogs like that. That's a tough basketball
And
team.
Miami, both offenses, for as much crap as we want to give Houston's offense because it doesn't run up the score, it likes to play in the 60s. Their offense is relatively efficient, and they have 3 or 4 guys who can go off on any given night. I mean, Trayvon Mark scored 4 points against Northern Kentucky and scored
A whole
26 or something against Auburn.
He was freaking awesome.
Jamal Shed led the scoring against Northern Kentucky. He had 5 assists against Auburn. They won on the road against Auburn. I mean, it's just this team is so tough. Their offense is good. Their defense is good. Miami's defense is not. And I think this is a game where you see Marcus Sasser or probably Shed, because Nigel Pack is not a good defensive player. Shed's probably going to have a massive game in this one. And I just don't see Miami keeping it close. It's probably going to be closer because the score is going to be lower. My guess is probably going to be like 67, 63, 62. It's going to be like a 5 to 6 point game, but it's never going to feel like Miami's actually in the game. Like, I feel like Miami's never going to really get in a rhythm to go on a run. I feel like it's just going to be a slow, grinded out game where you feel like Houston controls it from tip to finish. And I think Little Hoops Hope is going to agree.
He is. So pretty consensus. It seems like that we're picking Houston and Texas to win these games. Riley, who comes out of the region?
I'm still rocking with Houston. I got Houston over Texas in a really close battle in the Elite Eight. Again, I think that floor, I think Miami should keep it to single digits. I don't know, maybe Houston pulls away and extends it to double digits on free throws down the stretch or something. But I think Miami can keep it close, and I think Texas keeps it pretty close too. But I think, in that Elite Eight game against Texas, I'd give the coaching advantage to Kelvin Sampson, despite how awesome Rodney Terry's been this year. And ultimately, I do like the guards better. I'll take Sasser and Tremont Mark over Marcus Carr. Sorry, I'm like second guessing myself as I'm saying this because Sir Jabari Rice has been so good. But I like Mark and I like Sasser and Shed over Jabari Rice, Marcus Carr, and Tyrese Hunter.
Connor, who makes it for you?
I just don't trust Texas to keep it going for 2 straight games, unless Penn State is that game where they just threw up a dud and they still won. I just don't trust them to keep it going. And you talk about Sir Jabari Rice. Has he looked good? He had the 7 for 10 game from 3 against Colgate. Since March, since the loss to TCU, he's 2 of 6 from 3, 1 of 5, 0 of 7, 0 of 3, 1 of 6. So he hasn't actually been that good that lately. He just did really well against a Colgate team that's a fantastic offense and a very porous defense.
But
so
it feels like
I think Houston comes out of this region. Yeah, I feel like Houston comes out of this region because I don't see them losing to Miami. And like, to me, I'm probably leaning Texas in that Xavier game, but I think it's a lot closer than maybe you two give it credit.
It might be. I'm sticking with my pick of Texas over Houston. I have Texas winning the national championship for the reasons I mentioned earlier, in the way I think they can attack teams and beat teams in more ways than any team out there can. I do wish that a potential Texas-Houston matchup was in the national championship game, because I think that matchup deserves it. To me, if they meet in that Elite Eight game, whoever wins that Elite Eight game is going to win the national championship. To me, like that's how good both of these teams are. And you're really flipping a coin somewhat. Texas has been in more of these games than Houston has, and Texas has shown us time and time again throughout the season, whether they're pulling off double-digit comebacks or holding off a late surge or just making plays late, that they win close games. They come up big in clutch moments. Marcus Carr has done that. Tyree Tunner's done that. Serge Bar Rice has done that. Timmy Allen has done that, and he's come back from injury. Hasn't played that well yet this tournament. He could still have a game. Dylan Mitchell hasn't really done anything. Terry Morris really hasn't done anything, and you may not expect them to, but like it also wouldn't be a real surprise if they did. So you're splitting hairs here, flipping a coin. I'm going to go with Texas just because it's more proven. But if Houston wins, like, yeah, Houston won, and I think they'd go on to win the title. So it'll be a lot of fun to watch there. The only other 1 seed that made the Sweet 16 is Alabama. They lead the South region, matching up with the 5 seed San Diego State. The other game is your classic 6 against 15, Creighton going up against Princeton. We won't spend too much time on that game, Connor, but what are the chances that Princeton keeps it going since you saw them in Sacramento?
Missouri doesn't really have a strong defense or really a strong front court, and I think Princeton took advantage of that. Arizona, flip it. They don't have a strong defense, but their backcourt is abysmal at times.
I've been telling you all year
against Princeton. Creighton has the best guard and the best big on the court in that game against Princeton. And there's not really one, you can't sell out to shut down one unit, because if you shut down Nemhard and Alexander, Kalkbrenner's going to put 35 on you. If you sell out to shut down that front court, then Nemhard's going to put up 30. Like that's the reality you're dealing with Princeton. So kudos for making the Sweet 16, but the matchups at this point, I think, are just all the teams left are just too well-rounded for Princeton to pick up a win.
I'm in agreement, Riley.
Yeah, I think people are kind of sleeping on Creighton as even a Final Four contender. That's how good they are. We'll look at their first round games. Brian, I want to start with their game against NC State. Can you remind the good people at home what does not happen to NC State?
Good things. Good things don't happen to NC State.
Good things do not happen to NC State. That's why when everybody was gassing up this offense about these guards who can make tough shots, about DJ Burns who can create so many mismatches, it's like, well, Creighton was able to shut down, at least they shut down Jarkel Joyner. Baby T, maybe he got his, but Jarkel Joyner cut the water off on him, held NC State, I think, to a point per possession, maybe even, it might have even been beneath a point per possession. And on the other end, their offense, they were able to exploit DJ Burns in pick and roll. Then against, but I still feel, so they kind of won with mainly their defense, but they had enough on offense. Whereas the second round against Baylor, that was just complete offensive fireworks. And I think the fact that, they got the 13th ranked defense in the country on KenPom, 24th ranked offense, it's just too much for a team like Princeton to overcome. And especially with that defense, they're too sound, they're too connected to get beat to death by like backdoor cuts and that type of stuff. So give me the Jays.
Alabama Creighton, might happen. But Alabama's got to get through San Diego State first. This matchup, to me, Connor, I'm very excited about. What are the chances of an upset here? Because Alabama has looked awesome through the first 2 games. But San Diego State also played probably the best game of its season the last time out against Furman.
San Diego State needs to hope that the only mismatch on Alabama's side continues to be cold. Brandon Miller is 5 of 19 in this tournament from the field. He was 5 of 17 in that second game. He was 0 of 2 in the first game, but he was 5 of 17 in the second game against Maryland. Maryland has a okay defense.
No.
Not as good as San Diego State's. And that's the mismatch. That is the guy who needs to go off against San Diego State, because I feel like the length of those guards for San Diego State are going to give the backcourt for Alabama a lot of issues. Javon Quinterly is not long. Mark Sears is not long. Jaden Bradley's not really all that long. Amari Burnett's probably your longest guard. Like, you're talking about a backcourt for Alabama that is just it's small. It's good, but it's small. And San Diego State, Brian, you've seen them play last year, but it's very similar players. They're big. They're just big players. Even if the heights aren't big, like their length and their size, and so you need to take advantage of that in this match with Brandon Miller. He needs to have I belonged in that Naismith Final Four type of game to really put it out of reach. Now, if he goes cold, can Alabama beat San Diego State? Sure. But if Alabama wants to say, yeah, we're playing at our ceiling, we're still the best team in college basketball, Brandon Miller needs to find his shot. And I feel like he needs to find a shot against San Diego State, because if they beat San Diego State and he doesn't have it, Creighton's offense is way better than San Diego State's offense. And I think that's where Alabama would fall if Brandon Miller's not catching fire.
Do the Tide keep rolling, Riley?
I think they do, but I think the matchup itself presents a couple interesting storylines. For one, just looking at the pace, where on KenPom, Alabama's offense ranks 6th in average possession length, whereas San Diego State's defense ranks 346th in average possession length. So you have a team that forces you into long possessions with Nate Oates. I mean, for Nate Oates' whole tenure at Alabama, he's gone out and run and got a bunch of possessions. And then the other stylistic note I noticed was just that Alabama's defense is third. Their 3-point defense is third in the country, and San Diego State's is 4th. So there might not be a ton of 3-pointers made in this showing, but I think ultimately, even looking at, Connor mentioned some of the matchup issues they can cause with their guards and their size. For with Javon Quinterly, what he does lack in length and what he might give up on the defensive end. I mean, for one, at least he has a shot blocker who has his back in Charles Bediako, who's been playing incredible ball recently, and Noah Clowney, another guy, versatile front court weapon. But Quinterly, I've been really impressed by how he's been playing going back to, I think, the SEC tournament is when Oates put him back in the starting lineup. And I mean, I think he's eclipsed 18 or 20 points in maybe 3 of their last 5 games, something like that, to where he's, he can give you something on the offensive end that can make up for the liability on the other end. And ultimately, I think with how good Alabama's defense can be, I just worry about San Diego State being able to score enough points unless they completely control the tempo and just muck the game up, which, is in the realm of possibilities.
I've said this for a good portion of the year, where Alabama's best is better than anybody else's best. Like when Alabama is playing really well, they're the best team in the country by far, and no one, not even Houston or Texas, whoever can necessarily touch them. They also have some issues, those issues being turnovers, which have been better since Quinterly came in the lineup. Turnovers and just the reliance on the 3-point shot. They're not a great 3-point shooting team. They're not terrible, but not a great 3-point shooting team. But they shoot a lot of them. That's what you do in Nate Oates' system. And they've had games where they've shot poorly, games where they've shot below 25%, shot below 20% as a team. It's not an infrequent thing. In those games, they've struggled or lost to inferior competition. San Diego State's defense, with that length, you brought up the 3-point defense, does not really let you shoot a lot of threes, let alone make a lot of threes. They put a lot of pressure on the perimeter, and they force turnovers. Not at a super high rate, but that length, if you're sloppy the way Alabama can be, forces a lot of turnovers. I picked this, and this is like really the last limb that I'm out on. I think this matchup plays into San Diego State's hands. They're still going to have to play at a really, really high level to pull off this upset. But to me, San Diego State is built to exploit Alabama's weaknesses. Alabama could overcome those weaknesses with awesome games from Brandon Miller and Javon Quinterly. You brought up Quinterly. He's playing like he was playing before he hurt his knee. And I think we're finally starting to see him get that back. And I think that's also part of the reason why Oates put him back in the starting lineup, is that he's more like himself and playing more like himself, which is really good to see, because he's an awesome player and really, really fun player to watch when he is totally healthy and on his game. But we also haven't really seen San Diego State have like a Matt Bradley game. they have a number of guys who can go out and get you 20 that have gone out and gotten 20 this season. It would have to be more of a collective effort for them. But again, they're built to exploit Bama's weaknesses. I think this will be closer than a lot of people think it will. I picked the upset when the bracket came out, anticipating this matchup. I don't think it happens 100% of the time, but it doesn't need to. It just needs to happen this time. And I think San Diego State can pull the upset here. I have them in my Final Four. I had them beating Creighton. That's held firm, so I'm going to stick with what I picked when the bracket came out. Riley, who do you think is coming out of this region?
I'll also stick with Alabama and Creighton, but you make a pretty compelling case for the Aztecs, especially with the turnover issues. I mean, that's such a key metric, a key statistic in tournament games. And Alabama has not necessarily valued the ball all year, but they do get a ton of possessions, generally speaking, so it doesn't quite hurt them as much.
Connor?
I think it's Alabama. I do think that they need to get. I think the game getting past San Diego State is a lot worse of a matchup than it would be against Creighton, because Creighton doesn't force a ton of turnovers on defense. So yeah, sure, Alabama's going to turn the ball over still, but it's not going to be nearly to the degree that some of these other teams that they'll play, like San Diego State, would turn them over. And the other thing about Creighton is Creighton sells out for the defensive rebounds. They don't sell out for the offensive rebounds. Alabama is the number one field goal percentage defense in the country. You need to sell out for offensive rebounds against them, because you need as many chances at the basket as you can get. And Creighton just doesn't do that. That's not their game. Do they adjust? Sure. But I think Alabama, like you said, they are the best team in the country when they're playing at their ceiling, and it looks like they're playing at their ceiling.
Well, let's go to the last region we haven't talked about. Yes, the East region in Madison Square Garden turned into the region of chaos. There's always one. We have the 9-seed Florida Atlantic facing Tennessee, 3-seed Kansas State facing 7-seed Michigan State. I think there are some good storylines here, but I also think that whoever comes out of here is probably going to be the worst team in the Final Four, no matter which of these four do. But I think we could get three entertaining matchups from this, Connor. We'll start with that Kansas State-Michigan State matchup. Michigan State's been playing well. You have Tom Izzo in March. However, real or not real, the whole Mr. March thing is. Against a Kansas State team that has played well all season. Marquise Noel put on a freaking show against Kentucky and is going to be the best player on the court. How do you see that matchup shaking out?
Man, I just think Kansas State has such good vibes right now. Like they just look good. And they did really well against a Kentucky team that I think has more talent than Michigan State. So you're going to need another game from Hogard and Walker that puts them so far ahead of the guards for Kansas State. And I just don't think it happens. So I'm going to say Kansas State wins that game. Look, Michigan State making it this far is already overplaying their seed. So kudos to Izzo for doing that. But I think just the confidence that Marquise Noel is playing with right now, like he's the best guard in the tournament right now. And so guards win tournament games. He's the best guard in the tournament. Right. You got to give it to Kansas State.
Yeah, I echo all the vibe sentiments, especially, Marquise Noel, a Harlem native, is playing in the Garden. You can't tell me, there's nothing you can say that will make me believe he's not dropping 30 and 15 this game. Like, he is going to show out, and I think it's too much for Michigan State to overcome, even if they get good games from Tyson Walker and AJ Hogard again. I think, maybe Walker can make it a little bit interesting because he's been pretty pesky getting steals recently, getting runouts, and he can cook a little bit in the mid-range and everything. But yeah, I just think they have they have the two best players on the court in Keontae and Marquise Noel, and you can make an argument that maybe Michigan State has the next four best between Walker, Akins, or Hogard, take your pick there, and maybe like Joey Hauser. but I don't think there's that much of a drop off between some of those role players and Naquan Tomlin and Desi Sills to make it seem like Michigan State has any sort of advantage when it comes to depth or balance or anything like that.
Michigan State's ticket to winning this game is shooting the three well. It's what they've done all season long. They're 6th in the country in three-point shooting. They have to hit their threes at a really high clip to win this game, and that's the case for them just in general. But we've talked a lot of this season about how it feels like 2011 in the sense where one guy can have an oversized impact and pull the Kemba type run, a Shabazz Napier type run. I thought it was going to be Kendrick Davis in this region. It was not. I should not have overlooked, just like Kemba Walker, a small point guard from New York City who plays for the 3 seed in the bottom left region on the bracket, which is where Kemba's UConn team came from. Marquise Noel was spectacular. I fully expect him to be again. He is either going to be lights out this weekend and be awesome, or he's going to turn into like bad J.R. Smith, where he's like pulling up from the logo and just airballing shot after shot, but he's so hyped to be in the Garden that he's just chucking no matter what. Like, it's either going to be painfully bad or awesome, and I'm going to lean in the category of awesome. So give me Kansas State there. Johnell Davis for FAU has quietly been really, really good too, and he was great in the Memphis game. Not as much attention was paid to him in the Fairleigh Dickinson game because they're playing Fairleigh Dickinson, and most of the talk was could Fairleigh Dickinson win another game and be the first 16 seed to go to the Sweet 16. He leads FAU against Tennessee team that had to survive Louisiana's comeback effort in that first matchup, Riley, and then handled Duke with relative ease on the strength of that defense. How does this matchup look to you?
Yeah, I would consider taking the Owls here. I love, again, you have Johnell Davis is coming off of one of I think what we saw Marquise Noel do that first weekend was special. Janelle Davis is pretty high up there with having that 29-point, 10 rebound, 5 assists, 5 steal game. Yet at the same time, I think it does cheapen it a little bit that it was against a 16 seed, where it's like, Marquise Noel did this against Kentucky. Johnell Davis did this against Fairleigh Dickinson. But I like their balance. I like Vlad Golden is a dude who's not going to be afraid to bang it down low against Tennessee's size, but with how physical UT plays, and I think it was even Dusty May who made some sort of like bringing a rugby team type joke in a press conference to play Tennessee. Yeah. It's hard for me to think that FAU can beat Tennessee because I don't know if they've seen a team this year that has that type of physicality. And if Olivier Conwell can do anything like he did against Duke, where he couldn't miss from mid range, he was knocking down threes, it's going to be really tough for FAU to win. So. Yeah,
he had 27 points against Duke. His season high before that was actually 27 against Texas. But leading into that game, his point totals 8, 11, 9, 7, 16, 10, 13, 6, 9, 6, 10, 9, and 11. And then boom, 27.
Well, I'm very grateful for Olivier. I'm very grateful for that. Man. Thank you.
I'm not going to bet on that happening again. But I also think Tennessee kind of needs it just with the state that their offense is in, Connor.
They do. I don't know if they need it against FAU. I think similar to some of these other teams, but especially in this matchup, like FAU Tennessee's a whole different caliber of physical, right? And you could say it has to do with how the game's officiated, whether they win or lose, or whether Vescovi can go off or not. But like, they're just so physical, and I don't know if FAU is going to be able to. Like, sure, Golden's a really good big. What's going to happen down low with Plavsic in the first 5 minutes of that game? Because that's going to set the tone in that matchup. right? Like he has to hold his own against, call him dirty, call him physical, whatever you want to call him. Like that's who he is, and that's what he's going to have to deal with. So I think it's going to be close, because I do think that FAU's offense is leaps and bounds better than Tennessee's just on an average basis. But I think Tennessee's physicality is going to be what ultimately, I could see FAU winning the game after 30 minutes, and just the physicality is going to wear on that Owls team to the point where, like, I think Tennessee probably wins this game by 2 to 3 possessions.
I could certainly see it. To me, this is the biggest toss-up, because I think FAU is a more well-oiled machine. The question is if they can do it against Tennessee's size and physicality. I don't think it necessarily matters, though. I think Kansas State comes out of this region. Connor, do you agree, or who do you have coming out? Whoever I say just feels wrong coming out of my mouth, but
right? And it's going to feel wrong coming out of my mouth with as much as I doubted Tennessee all season. But all Tennessee has to do is shut down Marquise Noel for 20 minutes in that game. And I think they can do it. Like, I think that's the issue, is that Kansas State is the perfect matchup for Tennessee, because Kansas State's better. No, I think offensively, especially, but all you have to do is shut down Noel and make it tough for Keontae Johnson. And Kansas State is a different team. And of all the teams in the tournament, there are 2, maybe 3 that I think can do that. And Tennessee is definitely one of them. And so they just have the size advantage at the 1. They're going to make it really tough for Noel to get anything going. He's going to have to go nuclear from deep. And could he? Yes. But I just think Tennessee is they're going to win like a 57 to 53 game against Kansas State, because nobody's going to want to make shots. They're going to sell out defensively, and they're going to like hit 10 to 12 shots from the floor and the rest from the free throw line.
Riley?
I'll still go with K-State. I think that's what their fans do. I don't know why. Every man a Wildcat, baby. Rocking with Marquise Noel, lighting it up in the Garden. But Connor has some good points. I think when you look at how you stop Kansas State, they can put Jemai Mashak on Marquise Noel, who's been an awesome defender for them, has really increased his level of play since Sakai Ziegler went down, and gives them another point of attack defender. And you can put Josiah Jordan-James on Keontae Johnson, who, by the way, he's seen a couple times at Florida. So it's not necessarily, there's not any sort of like unknown scouting or matchup thing that like Tang could take advantage there. So I do like some of Tennessee's recipe to succeed, and even more looking at Kansas State's schedule. They've won a handful of games where they've gotten slogged down and won by scoring 60 points, but I mean, it seems like the vast majority of their wins, they've gotten into the 70s, and most teams find that a pretty tough thing to do, unless you're Missouri, who somehow just like had the magic elixir to cure all offensive woes against Tennessee. But most teams struggle to put up 70 on them. But still, I can't pick against Kansas State right now. My guy Jerome Tang has them rolling. The vibes are too high right now. And come on, I mean, like I said, it's Marquise Noel and probably 100 of his family members and friends in the Garden just getting rowdy for him.
It's a region where everything feels wrong. And like I've said, Kansas State, I think, comes out of here. But traditionally, those are the kind of regions where Michigan State is left standing at the end of it. Like that's just kind of what they do. And none of us picked them, which means they're going to be there, because that's just what Michigan State and Tom Izzo do. Either way, and no matter what happens, we're very, very excited to have another awesome week of basketball starting on Thursday night. We will know who our Final Four are. The team is going to Houston next time we talk to you early next week. We'll recap the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games, take a quick look ahead to the Final Four, and that'll be the last episode of the regular season. We'll be back after that to recap and look ahead and everything like that. But we're getting down to it. This is time where you're no longer Cinderella. You are either legitimate or you're not, and we're going to find out this weekend. From our co-host Connor Hope. Go ahead, Connor.
I just wanted to do a quick score update because Brian currently in our draft has 3 points. He got the Furman win and 2 FAU wins. Neither Riley nor I have any points, but final 4 teams we have left. Brian still has FAU left. He has Houston, UConn, and Creighton left standing. Riley, you have UCLA, Kansas State, Gonzaga, and Xavier. And I have Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, Arkansas, and Miami. So it's coming down. Brian has a good lead, but he also has fewer opportunities for a Final Four run.
Yeah, I think I picked all of Connor's teams.
Hey,
who would have seen?
Who would have seen my Iowa State pick coming back to bite me as they struggled to shoot higher than 20% against the Pittsburgh Panthers?
Nobody could have foreseen it.
As I watched
you got rid of Iowa State and picked Marquette. You replaced Iowa State with Marquette, and still that.
Who did I replace mine with? Because I replaced UNC with somebody. Was it? I think I got San Diego State in there.
Did you really?
Dang. No, you replaced Penn. No, you kept Penn State. Creighton. You picked up Creighton, I think.
That was smart.
It was Creighton or TC. I don't know. You picked up someone.
Either way, it works. Well, thank you guys again for listening to this episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball college. Make sure you rate, subscribe, review, all those things every podcast tells you to do because it helps. So we're going to ask you to do it too. My co-host Connor Hope and Riley Davis. I'm Brian Ralph. Thank you guys very much. Talk to you again next time.
Basketball college. Basketball college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball college. Come on. Basketball college. Whoa. Basketball college. Whoa, basketball college.